So we're going to record, and I would love some reminder when we go into break rooms and when we go into the fishbowl and demo group. I will stop the recording, and I might forget. So if somebody catches that I had forgotten to do that, please do alert me.
Yeah, I'll try to do that.
Yeah, anybody can do that. We're all in this together. So welcome everyone. I'm gonna just say a couple of words of introduction and gratitude. This is our group reorg training to using anti-racism to restructure our groups and our organizations. Aziza and I have done part one a little while ago. So let me introduce myself, and then Aziza, maybe you can introduce yourself, and then we can just say something about the training that we had done for the first section, because I know that some people were not here, and some people might have just, it's been a while, so it's nice to have a reminder. So my name is Avivi. I'm a clinical psychologist in New York. I am a cisgender, white, Israeli and American, able-bodied woman, and I work a lot with groups, both in the context of clinical work and in organizational settings. And this is a passion of mine. I'm very honored and happy to be here with you today. Aziza, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Aziza Belcher Platt. I'm a counseling psychologist, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, which is home of the Muskogee and the Creek people. Um, and I work in a medical group. I also have a small private practice, and I do things like this with ID. So we want to say thank you to the ASA for inviting us back. We had the first one of these in January, and we know that people have been very busy and active since then. And we wanted to say we appreciate the people who coordinated us coming back for this, the e-learning team for helping us to make this a CEU, and the AGPA staff for setting up, and of course, everyone who's here for participating and attending to anti-racism.
And before we go into our first step, I just want to say a couple of words of what we did in January when we first met with you all. I think that the most important thing for myself and for Aziza that we wanted to emphasize is that when you look at organizations within the group psychotherapy world, it's very, and you want to create an anti-racism organization, it's very important to move beyond just an invitation of Black and Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color to partake in your endeavors. It is something that requires a bit of a depth work and understanding the history of racism within the organization and doing some other forms of taking more action. Because I think, Aziza, you had said that sometimes we're inviting someone into a burning house, and we're not inviting someone into a place where they might be harmed, or there aren't any structural and functional ways in which the organization is prepared to address racial incidents and racial tensions, is not a safe space and not a fair request of BIPOC individuals. And I'm using BIPOC just as a shorthand, and I know that that term doesn't work for everybody. So hopefully it works for most people, and do let me know if there's another way that you would like me to address the group of Black and Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color. So I think what we wanted to do today is kind of build on that building block of invitation to do some depth work. We talked about a lot of different things in our first presentation. Aziza, do you want to reflect on something from back then?
Yeah, for people who were with us, you'll remember we did a lot of like interpersonal and intrapersonal work. So it is about sort of knowing your own social location, your identity. Where are you in your racial identity development? Because a lot of that plays into how we interact with other people and our consciousness around the fact that we are different and we may have some biases or be socialized to treat other people different, which is really important. And so we also then began to talk about like that continuum, and we'll show it to you again, of what it's like to move from being a racist organization to an anti-racist multicultural organization. So the work does start with us as individuals in order for us to get to the place of organization and institutional and systemic change, we have to be the agents of that. It also means that we do have to look at and reflect on our organizations and our institutions, because it can't just be us. We could all be walking around being anti-racist, but if we don't change the structure that has been in place, then the problem still exists in some form or fashion. So with that.
So if you remember, those of us who have worked with Aziza and me for a little bit, we always want to start with a little bit of mindfulness. And the reason is that as individuals within this system, we do have a reaction and an experience that might guide us into a particular choice of action. And we want to be very aware of it. And mindfulness is a wonderful tool to remind us that when we're faced with bias, either we feel that people are treating us in a biased way, or we have biases inside of us that might be pulling us toward a particular way of viewing or interacting in a situation, knowing that that's what's going on is very important. So we want to research the self as a first step. And that self-research has to do with the different things that happen to us when we are in any situation. We want to start noticing the sensations of the body. I know that for me, if there is racial tension and I have a lot of feelings, my chest gets constricted, my muscles became a little tight, I react differently with the body. What emotions are present for me? So kind of like the sphere of the heart. People feel emotion in different ways, but kind of like thinking what's in the body, what's in the heart, what's in the mind, what thoughts are coming up? What kind of quality of thoughts? Do I have judgment thoughts? Are my thoughts clouded, racing, empty? What's going on? What are some urges that I might have? Do I have an urge to talk? Do I have an urge to withdraw? An urge to protect somebody, an urge to protect myself, and noticing our behaviors and body movements and what are we actually doing. So that's a practice that we call it mindfulness practice because it's a practice, and some people do engage in it and others not, but that's fine. We can do a little something together. So just to start us off with a little bit of, one of the trainers that I really, really appreciated and has done amazing work with the clinic that I work in is Dana Crawford, and she just has a cute shortcut that I like. It's called ABCPs, the affect, behavior, cognition, and physical of any interaction. So if that's useful for you, as it is for me, just thinking, what are my ABCPs in this very moment? So we're going to do a short mindfulness exercise just to kind of get us into the body. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do is I'm going to show you a picture. So do keep your eyes open. I know sometimes mindfulness exercises are about closing the eyes, and maybe we'll have another one if we have time later on. So I'm going to ring the bell 3 times. And when I do, I'm going to ask you to take a deliberate breath or 2, maybe slow down the out breath to invite a little bit of relaxation for the body. It's fine if you're not relaxed. It's just inviting the body to relax a little bit gives us some access to this information. And then we're going to just look at the picture together for about 30 seconds. So just getting ready. And just taking a look at this picture. Engaging with the image. Maybe noticing what the body is doing, any thoughts that are coming up, any emotions. And then if you're comfortable, you can use the chat function or raise your hand and tell us, maybe you noticed something, any of the ABCPs that came up that you're willing to share. And you're welcome to use the chat if that's easier.
I was aware of feeling frozen, just like the landscape.
Mm-hmm. So noticing that the landscape had some effect. Mm-hmm.
I was feeling frustrated for the deer. I felt like they were stuck.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of identification with the life there, the stuckness. Mm-hmm. I'm saying I felt cold and wanted to huddle with the group of the deers, and chest being tight because I noticed threat, being concerned about water coming out of the pipes, cognition were beauty, and then concern about the pipes.
I noticed the deer kind of subgrouped, you know, not all together, but in subgroups.
Mm-hmm. So noticing the group lingo kind of coming in as you're working with each other, and kind of noticing that those thoughts, oh, there's a subgrouping here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone, for that. This is a picture of the Dakota's pipeline from an article in the New York Times that, in fact, the engagement in the pipeline is being stopped. So I think when I looked at it, because I knew the context, I felt both hope and a little bit of shame, because I don't know much about it, not enough. So every time there's something about a political/environmental issue, there is some battle between having strong emotions and having those thoughts about knowledge and what does that mean. So do keep that with you as we're moving forward with the presentation.
So in talking about racism, we talked again last time, we won't go so deep into it, but there's interpersonal and interpersonal, right? The within self is our beliefs and biases about race and racism, and they include internalized privilege and internalizing racist and prejudiced beliefs about our own group. And then there's interpersonal, which is between individuals. Those are the beliefs and biases about race and racism that influence and affect our interactions with other people. And they're really the cornerstones of institutional racism. So right within institutions and systems of power, all sorts of unfair policies and discriminatory practices that disadvantage people of color and advantage white people or people who are white identified or adjacent. And again, at the top, we have that structural, systemic, strategic, societal, whatever you want to call it, which is among institutions and across the systems of our society, that cumulative and compounding effect of societal factors, right? Again, that systemically privilege white people and disadvantage people of color. So racial equity tools has a great definition for institutional racism, but I think you get the sense of what it is. The National Museum of African American History and Culture has a definition, and they were talking in this moment about education, but I love a number of pieces of it, right? It's a theory of learning and action to help us do the important work of dismantling racism. It highlights, it critiques, it challenges institutional racism. It addresses how racist beliefs and ideologies structure not just our one-on-one interactions and personal relationships, right, but how we support and maintain the disadvantages along those racial lines. And when we use the word institution, we're talking about it in the broadest sense, right? So there's institution, the macro system, which is the set of rules governing, interaction, and it's accepted as a fundamental part of the culture. So any familiar or long-established law, custom, practice, person, or thing, like when people say the institution of marriage, think of it that way, as well as at the microsystem level. So a public or private organization or establishment or affiliate society created for a specific purpose, and then any of the resources that society or that establishment occupies, whether it's a building, whether it's virtual, whatever that might be. And so, we've all sort of heard this terminology about the path from racist to anti-racist, right? Racist is pretty clear, or at least for some people, right? Believing that a particular race is superior to others, and really embracing and white privilege and sort of doing what you can to maintain the status quo. A lot of people like to think of themselves in the middle as non-racist. No, I respect everybody's right to be equal and to be treated fair, but they're complicit or engaged in upholding the benefits of racism without taking ownership of that. And of course, to be anti-racist means to believe in equity and justice and liberation for all people and reconciliation of the oppression that's happened. So if you're anti-racist, That means you're denouncing white supremacy and challenging your own privilege that came as a part of that and working to dismantle those systems. So at an institution and policy level, using some of what we got from Kendi, right? So a racist institution or policy is anything that produces or sustains racial inequity between racial groups. So non-racist, this is interesting because Kendi says there's no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with that. But there are institutions that are going to classify themselves as non-racist. And so some of the information around that is that, okay, these are places that have policies that ignore or are in denial about the existence of prejudice or discrimination within their institution. And they operate with very little contact with communities of color. Whereas an anti-racist institutional policy produces or sustains racial equity between groups. So that's really sort of like where we're going. And when we talk about institution at the highest level, there's a recent study where they looked at social determinants of psychosis using 3 areas. And this is in the US, right? So neighborhoods, trauma experienced at individual and collective levels, and perinatal complications. And they chose those areas because they are very consistent linked to psychosis, right? And how those areas are shaped by structural racism. And you can see that they came up with a model here. So as an institution of mental health, we are supposed to help people with things, including psychosis. But how are we doing that if we're not addressing what is causing that for some people? And so this is what it looks like to address it. The American Psychiatric Association issued, and I believe this was last year, an apology to Black, Indigenous, and people of color for its support of structural racism in psychiatry. And you can see the entire thing on their website or their Instagram if you're interested, but you'll see that what they're saying is they're beginning the process of making amends for the direct and indirect acts of racism in psychiatry and the ways in which what psychiatry did caused people of color to be viewed a certain way, treated a certain way, pathologized a certain way. So that's what it looks like at an institutional level to say that we're going to be anti-racist and to begin that. Adi?
Hillary, yes, sorry, I was muted. Hillary is asking if we'll make the slides available, and yes, we always do. Our slides are, we always make a PDF and send it, so you don't have to take pictures of it. And I'm also right now in the chat putting a link to a really interesting presentation about schizophrenia and race that I've been engaging with lately, and could just give a little bit of information about the connection between politics and pathologizing and that that diagnosis, schizophrenia. It's a very, very interesting presentation tying the rise of that diagnosis for Black men right with the rise of the social justice movements and the human rights movements in which Black people were more vocal and more engaged, and how pathologizing that behavior contributed to some of the inequalities that we see. And so I want to talk a little bit about one of the articles that we had sent as part of the bibliography that I thought was really interesting, and it's a short 7 pages article. It's really easy. And I think that the value of it is to go from what Aziza just described to us, that when an institution wants to start doing the anti-racist work, they might need to have a global perspective of taking responsibility of what was and really looking at the causes of why things are the way they are. So this is an opportunity to have an organizational approach to dismantling racism in psychiatry departments. It was just interesting that that's the article that I kind of got my hand on, and the seems like in the psychiatry world in the United States, there is some movement going as of late, and there's some thoughts about this. And the authors, Drake and Lewis, said, our use of the term organizational is purposeful in this effort, given that organizations are key to operationalizing or challenging the structural facets of racism, because they are by definition inhabited spaces where relations and processes are formed, transformed, perpetuated, and or destroyed. So you, as part of an affiliate, are in a space where so much change can happen and so much perpetuation of something can persist. So I'm again, grateful that you're here and excited to talk about it. So next slide, please. So they're talking a little bit about the lack of diversity in psychiatry. They talk mostly about Black and Latino and Latinx faculties and in medical schools, in psychiatry departments, in psychiatry schools. And overall, when they look at the overall population of different racial identities, they saw somewhere between 1.7 to 3.5% of staff and faculty. And it depends on whether it's medical school, a psychiatry department, etc. They also noticed that overwhelmingly 70% and more of Black and Latinx faculty members were not in tenure tracks, or tenure positions. So being an associate or affiliate professor. And nationwide, 2% of psychiatrists, 2% of psychologists, and 4% of clinical social workers identify as Black. And when we know who's the consumers of mental health, that is disturbing, because the research has shown that people benefit from having providers that share their racial background. So this is really a disturbing finding. And then they asked themselves, how did this happen? Because they noticed that they're both Black women, or I'm assuming because of their picture, so I'm not sure, but I think that they probably both identify as Black women. And so they had noticed that there is efforts done to change this. However, these efforts are very, very focused on diversity, representation, and inclusion. And they're not always looking at the causes of this problem. So what they saw is that the National Institutes of Health have particular funds and grants that are typically given much more often to research and studies that are focused on the cellular and molecular level of studies. And BIPOC researchers are more drawn to interventions and their effect on the patient's population. And although the research have also shown that the latter type of research is more effective in terms of creating greater effect in the quality of care and in medicine, it is still not receiving the same amount of funding. And NIH grants are key to getting tenured positions. So when we know a little bit of that information, it just explained a little bit more about our fields. And then they also mirrored it and said, when somebody does anti-racism work within an organization, within the psychiatric organizations that we know, it's typically part of an overall university and academic effort. It isn't specific for a department. It typically gets less resources in terms of administration help, in terms of funding, in terms of time allocated to it, in complete disproportion to much smaller in importance projects that are in the department. So a professor can get so much funding, time, and support to do a particular research project, but this doesn't get the same thing. So they started kind of looking at where is the money and where is funding going. Next slide, please.
Sorry, before we do, I was muted. Kathleen confirmed in the chat, these are her colleagues and they are indeed Black women.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. I'm so glad, and I was, of course, would be as happy to be corrected. I really thought that their article is a beautiful thing. So they talked about how can we move from that singular, can I get another BIPOC faculty for my organization, to a foundational way of thinking about it. And they really are giving very simple and beautiful suggestion that I thought we could talk about before we do a little bit of an exercise going into break rooms. So they're talking about leadership, and the leadership has to be really thoughtful. So they say, if we want people to lead those efforts to move toward anti-racism, on the one hand, we cannot just rely on BIPOC individuals, and we have to let them lead. So it can't be just their job, and they got to take the leadership position. So that's one thing, kind of like how to do it. Second is, it needs to be on a team. You cannot ask one person to do this work. at least 2 people should do this work together, because it's emotionally taxing and it's time consuming, and people need support in that. It needs to come from all the support of leadership. Also has to be that every level of leadership is willing to support this effort, from the provost to the chair to whatever the leadership of the department is, needs to be informed, and their support needs to be recruited and solicited. There has to be a reflection of the leadership has to get payment and time to do it, get collaborations, support, both academic, admin, and financial resources. And one of their action idea that I loved was to create cluster hiring. Because part of the problem with retention is that if you are just one of an individual trying to do the work that needs to be done for a team, it will be very hard to retain your capacity to do it, and then the institution will not retain you as an individual that works with them. So I love the idea of cluster hiring. And we can think, it's different for the affiliates, however, we can think together. And I know that Aziza and I are going to work with AGPA, and there was, in a way, I think, a cluster. People know that we like working together, and we will offer to do something together. And I think we both felt that that's why we could do it. That's why we could say yes to it. Assessment, the need to assess what is going on. And Drake and Lewis did some assessment. Why are there so few academic and faculty positions that are filled by BIPOC individual? It's because there is a structural, systematic prioritization of certain kind of research that isn't as appealing or isn't as common with certain populations. So assess, what's the payment? What's the promotion like? What's the hiring practices? What kind of trainees are coming to our institutions? What is the ratio between Black and Latino patient population and the people who give the services? We also want to assess the attitudes and beliefs of people who are working in the organization. And if we find out that there is strong biases and people do hold racist beliefs, we want to create a curricula for everybody from the top down to be actively engaging. And so that later on we can reassess and reassess. Are things changing? Do we have movement? Is what we're doing working? And to assess health outcomes. And again, I know that health outcomes, it's a little hard for affiliates sometimes to assess health outcomes and how it's, this article is not one-to-one from psychiatry to affiliates, and we can all think about it together. And then engagement. So they're talking about leadership, assessment, and engagement. Developing the capacity within the organization to talk about racism beyond the individual, beyond telling my personal story with it, regardless of my racial background. It's a little bit like what the American Psychiatric Association did. They told their stories, they engaged in looking at the history of their organization and giving that some space. Can we talk about what's really going on? Training department leaders to engage in anti-racism in their different roles and responsibilities, and create spaces for engagement regarding concerns and model effective interracial conversation. So allowing engagement in many different ways with this issue of anti-racism work in a way that invites people to stay and gives them the resources, and then ongoing assessment of, are we moving toward the next step? And I think what we're going to do today is a little bit of that assessment. So we met with some of you a little earlier this year, and even if you weren't here, I'm sure your organization had anti-racism in their focal point, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. So I think our next step would be to really look at some of the assessment. And Aziza, please take it away.
Yes, let me make sure I'm not muted. Okay, so we shared this. This is one of the things we shared last time, right? This continuing on becoming an anti-racist multicultural institution. And so you can see here, and this is a fantastic tool just because you can see what it looks like to be monocultural and what those behaviors actually look like versus when we're over on this other end, anti-racist and multicultural. We also shared this, right? That we need to embrace the fear, the learning, and the growth that comes with the anti-racist journey. And it is absolutely a journey. It is not a destination. And we shared this racial justice assessment tool, which anybody can use, and it's freely available. This is just a snippet of it so that to remind you all, right? But for each of these particular categories to be able to say, where is our organization? Are we at a red light? We've not gone there, or at a yellow light where we've started taking some steps, but we've not gotten where we're going, or at a green light, we're fully on board and we're making progress in this way. So regardless of whether or not you were with us last time or you use these tools, we're gonna put you in breakout rooms. And I think we have about 30 people, so maybe 6 rooms. And what we want you all to talk about in these breakout rooms is, in terms of your affiliate, in terms of the institutions you work in, what are the areas of movement? What are the challenges? And what are the blockades? And so we will broadcast a message to remind you all of those 3 things once we have everyone in breakout rooms. And Adi and I will try and pop in. Adi, maybe he'll take rooms 1 through 3, and I'll
Sure.
take 4, 5, and 6.
Excellent. I will do that. And Aziza, I think it would be good to put, if you have it handy, the link for that work page.
Absolutely.
To put it in the general chat, because I think it's helpful and has helped a lot last time. Just if people want like a conversation starter, they can take a look at it.
Okay.
So I'm opening all the rooms. I think, would people have, this is my Zoom not knowing, will people have access to the chat even when they're in the break rooms?
They will not, but we can broadcast a message. So we will broadcast a reminder. Again, we're going to be talking about areas of movement, challenges, and blockades. And I'm going to drop the racial justice assessment tool here in the chat, just in case someone wants to access that and didn't have access.
Okay, great. So yes, how long you'll have. We were thinking about 12 to 15 minutes of conversation. So about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and do a debriefing. And I will close the rooms, and you'll have kind of like a notice that says like, rooms are closed in 1 minute. If this Zoom works like mine, this is the AGPA Zoom. So I'm like, we'll see how that works. Okay, so please do click on the link that Aziza just put in the chat, and I'm opening the rooms.
Are you stopping recording or?
Oh yeah, thank you. Okay, so now that we're recording, I'm gonna, thank you so much, Kevin. We're talking about a model that Ken Hardy, who's a wonderful anti-racism educator, created to help people talk to each other in an effective way. What he says is that sometimes, or maybe rather often, people either don't talk about race, and in that kind of living in that sphere of colorblindness, like there's nothing to talk about, or avoiding the conversation, or they talk about race in a spontaneous, let's just jump into it kind of way. And both cases can be really harmful. One, because of the silence, and the other because this is a very charged conversation that can create difficulties for anybody within the conversation to be effective, to be non-biased, to be able to listen, and to know what they actually need to do in order for the conversation to be fruitful. So he talked about a model of ownership over power and privilege in multiracial interaction, saying that the first step is to ID yourself within the racial conversation. And for that conversation, what he says is, you need to know if you're white or white passing, if you are receiving white privileges within our society, or are you a Black, brown, indigenous, or other person of color. And when you are white or white adjacent, you do have unique privileges and therefore unique tasks. And when you're not, you are subjugated within the world of racial tensions, and you have a different task or a different set of tasks. So he also emphasized that even if you don't feel privileged, and in fact have many areas in your life in which you have suffered oppression or bias, when we're talking about racial conversation, that should be the line that tells you which position to take and which tasks you need to follow. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the tasks of the privilege. Just a second, I need to somehow, okay. Oh, I know what to do. Yes, okay, now I see everything. So the task of the privileged, the person who is white or white adjacent, is to, when the conversation is happening, to differentiate between intentions and consequences. Most of us as human beings don't have bad intentions. We want to be helpful. We want to be heard. We want to engage in a way that produces some positive change. We believe in what we say, and it's important to us. However, the consequences and the effect that we have is what matters. When we are white or white adjacent, we need to take into consideration how we affected other people in the conversation. So to be, there's also kind of acronyms about being an ally. Always focus on the outcome, always focus on the effect, and not the intention. See what happened to the subjugated person from what you did or what you said, and take that first before going any further in the conversation. Avoiding the covert and overt negation of subjugated conversation and disclosure. So a lot of time there is a pull, and it could be from a desire to make it better, to say, maybe it wasn't about race. Oh, I'm being treated that way too. Or that's not what I saw happening. So taking into consideration the idea that BIPOC individuals are often seeing something that you might not be able to see, and practicing validation, validating what people are saying rather than negating it either covertly or overtly. Avoiding reactive reflexes, acts of relational retrenchment, rebuttal, and retribution, such as, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore, or fine, I guess what I have to say is not important. Kind of bringing hostility or quitting into the conversation as a response to some tension that arises inside of you because you're in that position of a privileged point. And the technique is to develop a thicker skin, to really be able to tolerate some internal tension and maybe the urge to withdraw or the urge to attack, and still stay there, validating others and taking responsibility for the effect you had on them. Avoiding issuance of prescription. So this is often giving advice, telling other people what to do, telling BIPOC individuals how to lead the fight toward anti-racism, what might be the next right step. So really avoiding that and noticing that you are going to let go of the desire to fix, the quick fix, the desire to prescribe something, and lead with valuable disclosure about yourself rather than assume what's best about others. That could be like, this is hard for me. I really want to fix this for you. Can you tell me more? It could be all sort of different ways in which you are saying where you're at rather than telling other people where they're supposed to be. And the last is avoiding speaking from an expert position, which can be so hard. And I see all the time, AGPA listserv is a place where you see people sit in the expert position. I'm seeing Aziza rolling her eyes because it's so hard sometimes to see that and to care about that deeply, because if only these people can like read Ken Hardy's article and say like, oh my God, I am inhabiting the expert position and I'm holding on to it. It's a protective position. It makes you feel like you know what's going on and what to do. However, locating where you are in your racial self in the conversation is much more powerful, and taking responsibility and acknowledging privilege, it's much more powerful than trying to prescribe and be an expert. So let's talk for a minute about the tasks of the subjugated. So Hardy, and I want to first and foremost acknowledge that I'm a white woman right now presenting this part, and to say that although Hardy is really inviting for the person in that position to take a lot of space, the most important thing is your safety and your emotional labor capacities. So even though what he says is stay, take space, engage, sometimes the most effective thing is to disengage and to find the spaces that are healing for you. I think that's just something that I want to say. So being voiceless and silenced is one thing that happens to people in minority position within this situation. And I know that I have a friend who told me that she's a Black woman, and she had told me that she feels a surge of shame when she's checking in with herself every time she takes space, because she wants to take space. And she has a lot of internalized trauma and intergenerational transmission of trauma about taking space as a Black woman. So not allowing that to stay such, taking space, challenging silence and voicelessness, wording yourself, being in the conversation, knowing that you might vacillate between constrained disclosure, kind of not saying everything, and becoming very enraged and talking from an intense place of anger. What Hardy is saying is replacing being enraged with being outraged, using the rage, being in the anger, and being effective with it, using I statements, taking risk, and saying maybe just a tiny bit more than what might be comfortable to kind of practice taking space. I talked about regulating and channeling rage, use it as an energy, attack ideas and not people, and staying in difficult conversation, engaging in the process of exhaling. So say what you mean what you say, focus on delivering your message, not keeping it all to yourself, not protecting others, not being somehow the harbinger of the peacemaking. And the next one just comes from it is cease and desist caretaking of the privileged. There could be a lot of intergenerational transmission of messages of I have to make sure that white people are taken care of for multiple reasons. Might be my role, or it might be a real fear of what happens if white people aren't taken care of and they're angry. Could be really dangerous. Allowing other people, other white people, to take care of each other and to take care of themselves. Don't cancel yourself or censor yourself. And again, all of what I'm saying is, first and foremost, take care of yourself and be sure that you're able and willing to be there without expending too much, and maintain your investment in the conversation. It is not about convincing other people to see it from your position necessarily. It's about sounding your voice and allowing yourself to take space. Aziza, do you want to add anything with that? You're muted, Aziza.
Muted and talking. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing. But I think that is important. And I appreciate the acknowledgement at the beginning, because there are times when any of those steps might not feel safe as a person of color, or you may just be exhausted. And so sometimes your task is just to take care of you and get to the next moment. And then when you have the energy and the bandwidth and the capacity and the security, then you can engage in some of the other tasks.
We wanted to talk about Hardy's tasks because we want to do a fishbowl, a demo group, and we would like to have a few volunteers. I also, if people have reaction or questions, we can certainly spend a minute on that. If not, I was not looking at the chat. Is there something in the chat that I need to address, or we're all good with the chat?
No, I think we're okay with the chat.
Okay. Yes, it's the recording. So if people are willing to be in the fishbowl, the way we do it is we ask people to keep their camera on. If you look at the bottom of your screen where it says stop camera, stop video, if you go into video setting and scroll down, you can say, there's a button there that you can put on the saying hide non-video participants. So if you click on it, you will only see the people in the fishbowl and not everybody. And we would like to have between 6 and 8 volunteers if people are willing. It's a big ask. Usually the fishbowl in our presentations are emotionally taxing, so we acknowledge that. But if people are willing, just stay on, and I'm going to do hide. Do everybody understand how to hide non-video participants?
Yes.
Okay,
We stop our video? Do we stop?
And stop your video, yes.
Unless you're willing to stay with us in the fishbowl.
If there's not enough.
You're all muted, so unmute.
Adi, I know how to stop my video, but I don't know how to like just get away, like the first option you were saying, so.
Okay, so when that's okay. Go to the stop video button and there's kind of like a little arrow, go on top and you'll see video setting.
I don't have an iPad, so I can do that.
I think I can stop this video.
Yeah,
What's
stopping
that?
the video.
Is it good enough? Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. And we have 4 people. Can we have maybe 2 or 3 more people who are willing to be in the fishbowl? All you need to do is put on your camera and then we'll see you if you're willing. And it's going to be relatively short. It's going to be at 20 minutes.
And we can stop the recording now, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So, recording in progress.
Thank you,
So
Michelle.
appreciate very much because that part is just not within my executive functioning today. And we just are open now for any observations, questions, anything that came up that people might want to talk about in our last 10 minutes together.
If I could say something really quick, I can't get off of my videos. Miguel Lewis can't get off of my video because the host disabled it.
Oh, sorry
there
about
you go.
that. Maybe I can get you back on.
He's on.
I think I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
good. Okay.
Appreciate it.
If it's more convenient, you are also welcome to use the chat function, if that will loosen up the anxiety of the talking in the bigger room.
So I don't know, this probably doesn't have to do with anything relevant, but I noticed that being in a fishbowl is different on video because you really don't see people. You're aware of them maybe being there, but not so aware, not as aware as being in a big room.
I'm going to read into it maybe some curiosity about the experience of people who you were less aware of for 20 minutes.
Jump in. I loved how quickly it was identified, the tendency to move towards intellectualization. And I like worried initially that the demo group would just be like processing what we've heard, but you moved into your personal experiences in a way that really helped something click for me, which is the welcoming of the discomfort as an antidote to complicity. It just like it crystallized, and I feel very grateful to everybody who participated.
Mm-hmm. I also thought it was amazingly quick that, you know, you both engendered this pretty safe enough space to really put oneself out there. You know, I mean, I was relating from afar to many things that were said, and it felt unusually engaging without as much intellectualization. So I'm really with Hillary, and you know, these feelings are just really intense, even being on the outside of, you know, being in the discomfort. I'm aware of feeling energized and how powerful it is, but it's also, oh, it's a state of a lot of intensity. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's overwhelming and exhausting, but it's there and it's not going away, you know. So I really resonated to a lot of what people said.
Thank you, Robin.
I'm noticing that I know I didn't say much, but I was feeling so much, or am still feeling so much. And I wanted to say that something that for me was interesting and a little bit grounding is that there's somebody here, Robin, that has my first name, and there's someone here, Stacy, that has my last name. And somehow, I don't know, somehow I connected in a way that was helpful just by seeing those ways that, oh, there's sameness there, you know.
I mean, I think you may be speaking to this pain that these topics sometimes bring of fear of being divided, or a fear of losing someone somehow, fear of saying the wrong thing, and kind of holding on to some symbols of closeness and connection. And I think one thing that came up in our presentation with AGPA, with the LA group, is that sometimes, unfortunately, you're just the wrong person for the connection. One thing that came up when we talked about Hardy's tasks is that sometimes white people have to find white spaces to do, if they're racism 101, it's really important to find spaces in which you are not going to ask BIPOC individuals to witness your journey because of what Aziza said. And sometimes for a BIPOC individual, it's not about division necessarily. It's just a need to be with people who are just not going to struggle with their own racism, to be with a group of people from the same racial backgrounds because it's healing. So we didn't say it explicitly, and somehow the way you talked about names, Robin, made me think about it. Again, I read a lot into facial expressions, so please forgive me, but I was reading something, Margaret, in your facial expression, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I got curious. If you are willing to say something, you're welcome. If not, don't worry about it.
I was just more reflecting on what you were saying. I have this thing, I don't know if you know, my face is kind of just like Stonewall until you notice something. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I just
I project all day of every day. So
I just love how open your group is. I mean, it's my first time coming to this organization. I think it's amazing how open you all are, and it seems as if, you know, you've known each other for a while, or you're still getting to know each other and you're willing to do the work. So I just appreciate that. So I'm just listening to your experiences and what you've been going through this entire time.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking my invitation.
And welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Into our burning house.
Yes.
You know, one thought I have about what everyone's been saying is that maybe while not doing the work for white people, but clustering when one is trying to go through the change of both diversifying, like in our case, the students of a program and the faculty to be more representative, that the clustering can be important for the people coming in also of color, that all of us have to do the work clearly, but that being alone in that burning house is even worse than trying to be together and figure a way out of it.
Amen.
I think that's so important, and camaraderie makes it possible. I love that idea of cluster hiring in the article. And I'm also noticing now that we have 1 more minute. So Aziza, I want to know if there is some final word that you want to say, or if somebody has a burning desire to share one more thing before we have to say goodbye for today.
Well, logistically, I know that in order to get CEUs, there's probably going to be a link and some questions. And so just want to remind you all to follow through on that process. I know those are not great instructions, but I'm sure you got them in the email when you registered. So, you spent this time with us and hopefully you got something out of it, and also want you to be able to get the credit for it. So please remember to do that.
Yeah, it's really important because I think now just to maintain your CGP, if you are a CGP, you do need continuing education, and some of it has to be about diversity. So don't forget to do that.
Yeah, if you have any problems with it, you can contact me. I have to figure out how to do it myself, so.
Thank you, Michelle.
Just a quick question about the slides that you said you'd share with us, and then the bibliography or the citations. Like, are you going to sort of automatically mail that to people who are here, or do we have to go someplace? How do we?
That's a good question. So the slides are ready. We're gonna send the PDF. Usually, I think what we do is send it to whoever organized and let them distribute it, because we don't have the distribution information for everybody. But here's a see, the references are just the last slide.
Okay.
And if somebody doesn't get it, just email either Aziza and me. We are active on the listserv. It's not hard to find our email. So just don't hesitate. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to send it to you if it's technically like not happening.
And I just want to acknowledge we see the chat, and thank you to the people who are saying, you learned things and you appreciate. We echo that back to you.
Thank you.
Really.
Will you all enjoy the rest of your Sunday? Right? Oh wait, is it Saturday? Oh my God!
It's just Saturday. You have a whole day to rest.
Thank you, ladies. That was fabulous.
Thank you so much all for coming today. It's really a pleasure being with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.